Welcome. Tonight, I would like to share with you information about the Marbled Murrelet natural history and the corvid management that we do that is closely associated with this special little bird. And I begin with this beautiful picture of two marbled murrelets doing bill pointing. That's where they swim together and they both kind of point their bill off in the same direction, and you can see it was taken right in front of the Santa Cruz wharf. And I think it really does a nice job of connecting the birds with the land here and the people, right? These places that people like to go. This is a talk I put together several years ago in cooperation with the Sempervirens Fund and gave at a handful of locations. Maybe some of you have seen a version of it. But I will jump right in. My story about marbled murrelets begins with a snowstorm. I want you to go back with me to 1973, and you know that it doesn't snow very much here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And you can imagine a winter day where there's a big storm, and our trees here are not accustomed to holding the weight of the snow. And so many of the branches broke. And the following summer in 1974, we hired a tree trimmer named Hoyt Foster to come in and trim a bunch of those branches. Now, Hoyt was an old timer. He'd been around and he had climbed a lot of trees, and he was climbing a tree in J Camp at Big Basin. He's about 140 feet up in a Douglas fir tree, and he sees something he's never seen before. He sees this. We call this a little puffball, really. And he gets out his saw and he starts poking at it with his saw. And it fights back. It was feisty. And you notice also it starts to back up, and he notices that it's got webbed feet. What does that mean to you? A bird with webbed feet. Well, that means it's generally a water bird. So he's scratching his head. He has no idea what he's looking at. He just can't imagine what this thing is. Well, he covered it with his jacket. It was a branch he was needed to cut down. So he needed to, in his mind, that was what he was supposed to do at that time because the branch had to go. He was going to carry it down. Well, the bird backed out from underneath his jacket and fell about 140 feet to the forest floor, where it seemingly was unharmed. They collected it and they brought it into the old Sempervirens building there, the headquarters at Big Basin. And they put it in a box and they asked around, does anyone know what this is? Nobody knew what it was. And it just so happened that an old ranger stopped by. Denzel Verardo came into the office that day, and he looks in the box and he says, aha, this is it. This is the solution. This is the answer that we've all been waiting for. This is the marbled murrelet. This is the chick of a marbled murrelet. For many years, murrelets had been found on the forest floor throughout the coastal redwood range. And it was always a bit of a conundrum. Where did they come from? What were they doing here so far from the ocean? Because this is a seabird. The marbled murrelet spends its time, most of its life, it spends at sea. And, you know, this was a conundrum for the people who settled this land in the last several hundred years. And I do need to mention that Native Americans, when early biologists asked them, where does this bird nest? They said way up there in the hills. They knew that it was found there. So I want to give them that. Well, the marbled murrelet is here is another really beautiful picture of a chick sitting on a branch. But the marbled murrelet is an auk, so it's a member of the puffin family. So it's related to common murres, puffins, rhinoceros auklets. And you can see here it's this brownish bird. It's named after this marbled color. It's small. It's about the size of a robin. They often say it's about the size of a baked potato, something you can hold in the palm of your hand. It's found singly and in pairs. So they're not generally large congregations of marbled murrelets, at least in the waters off of Santa Cruz. And they need to get a running start on the water. You can see here that he's kind of moving his way along, trying to push himself up. And they bring in fish to their chicks. And you can see here that up to 8 times a day, they will deliver food to their chick. They can do that at dawn. They can do it any time of the day, really. And they lay an egg, and that egg is laid. Let's see if the video seems to have slowed it down. Well, they lay a single egg on a tree. Oh, apologies, I got ahead of myself. So you can see that they're a seabird. Here's this image of their webbed feet. And I mentioned that they're marbled murrelets. Well, like many seabirds, like many birds in general, they change their plumage throughout the year. So in the wintertime, they are black and white. So they are dark above, light below. And that's standard camouflage for many, many seabirds. So for anything searching underwater to try and eat something that's sitting on this ocean surface, they're light. They kind of blend in with the background of the sky. And then from above, they're dark for birds or predators that are coming from above, looking at them on the ocean. Now, here's a nice slide that illustrates that gradation of color. You can see that light on the left, and as they molt and as they change into the breeding season, their colors become much more marbled, and that marbled color is a perfect camouflage for the redwood forest. Their range extends from Point Conception down Southern California, central Southern California, and it goes all the way up through the archipelago of Alaska. And they really hug the coastline there. You can notice that in the inside passage there in British Columbia, they go all the way into those inlets and fjords, and they've been found nesting 62 miles inland. So really incredible athletes and flyers when you think about it like that. The blue there at the bottom, it is showing you that they can be found as far south as Point Conception, but the Santa Cruz Mountains are the very southern end of their breeding distribution. So they do not nest further south of Santa Cruz. Now, maybe that would have been different hundreds of years ago. Now, they are associated with old growth forests, like we have here. It's a piece of it, Henry Cowell, but like was found all throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains and many of our protected state parks. And why are they associated with old growth? Well, they require those large, fat, wide branches. Why is that? Well, because they don't actually make a nest. They need those platforms that develop with old growth because they just nestle down into the duff and the leaf litter or the lichens or the moss or what have you. Just they need a big solid platform, and then they lay their egg on that platform. And their egg is quite large. It is the size of a chicken egg. And what did I say the size of the bird was? I said it was the size of a robin. So imagine a bird the size of a robin laying an egg that size. They don't lay more than one egg. If an egg is lost, they have been known to relay, but in general, they lay one egg and one egg only a year. You can see here that this mottled kind of light bluish green with those cool looking brown specks on it. And here is a nice wide platform, and you can see that wide white ring that is what we call the fecal ring. And it's exactly what it sounds like. So a little bit of poop ends up surrounding the outer edge of the nest. You can see here is another example of the kind of complexity that you see in old growth, weird, old, funky, wide branches with knots that are covered in moss and lichen. All right, so as you all know, we don't have much old growth left. We're down to less than 5% of the old growth. So you can make out these little green dots that I have here on this map. And this is the remaining old growth redwood in coastal California. And notice that we have this nice little collection of parks that had old growth for the last several hundred years. And here is that overlaid now in red, showing you the former distribution of old growth redwood in coastal California. Pretty marked difference between the two. Just look at the like visual loss that you can really see. All right, so in the Santa Cruz Mountains, much of the land, the forested land, was clear cut. This is a picture from the north coast, and in addition to logging, like in terms of impacts for marbled murrelets and that just general loss of habitat, marbled murrelets are also impacted through competition with fisheries. Marbled murrelets are eating small fish, and we had a massive sardine and anchovy fishery here 100 years ago. In addition to the direct competition and loss of food as a result of that, you're having actual mortality through fishing activities. There is the inevitable bycatch as a result of large-scale fishing. And then in addition to that, I might mention that we have had a handful of oil spills that have really affected marbled murrelet populations. And as Alex mentioned, I was involved in the very first hiring for someone to help manage marbled murrelets for parks as a result of this oil spill, the command oil spill that happened in 1998. This was a vessel that was found actively discharging oil. And you can see the discharge location is the dark gray spot, that the area that was actually affected. And the shoreline that was affected was the big stretch of the San Mateo coast here, shown with this darker gray line. And this, did I mention it was in 1998? Can't remember if I said that. But in addition to that, we had the Luckenbach oil spill that happened it happened off and on, starting in 1954, when the USS Luckenbach was sunk by the federal government, where that red cross is. And as a result of that, or I should say, as a result of them not emptying the oil that was within the vessel, it over time, through like movement of water and waves, it would burp bits of oil, and it would cover the shoreline all the way up to Point Reyes, all the way down to Monterey. Little bits of oil would be found. Now, oil has unique chemical signatures, and they're able, through some analysis, to determine where individual oil comes from. So they were able to eventually hone in on the fact that it was coming from this vessel, and they eventually went in and sealed it up. But as a result of all of these oil spills, there are trustee councils that are brought together, made up of trustee agencies like California State Parks, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior agencies, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a restoration plan is developed. Oh, I'm so sorry, I have one more to tell you about this, the Costco Busan oil spill, which many of you actually probably remember. This was when a vessel, a large shipping container vessel, hit the Bay Bridge, and oil, as a result of the tides, was spread from, again, all the way up from Point Reyes, all the way down to the San Mateo coast. So I lost my train of thought there, but we ended up having oil spill trustee councils that funded a restoration plan that called for restoration of all of the damages that happened as a result of these oil spills. They were estimating from these 4 oil spills that I mentioned that more than 52,000 birds were killed. And think about it, many of these birds actually get oiled at sea and then sink and die, and we never actually know how many are killed. The work to determine that number is done through some complex modeling, and this is, again, it's just an estimate. It's not actual birds that were found. And as a result of those different oil spills, $26 million was committed towards natural resources. Almost all of it was committed towards natural resource restoration and improvement. And that's what has helped pay my position for the last nearly 25 years. Now, I want to point out that many of the marbled murrelet nests that have been found, and there's only been just over 20 nests, I think 21 nests total, almost all of them have been found near these known recreation areas. You can see the circled areas there. We got Big Basin State Park, Butno, Pescadero Creek County Park, and Portola State Park. Now, we have been monitoring marbled murrelets. It didn't start as early as the 1970s. There wasn't a good monitoring method for them. But in the early 1990s, they began doing surveys at the redwood meadow at Big Basin. This is the number of occupied detections or behaviors. An occupied behavior is the number of times you see a bird, an individual bird, flying below the height of the tallest tree. And so in the early 1990s, we had about 70 or so of those per morning. And starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had a marked decrease in the number of birds, and we're getting on average about 10 or less detections. We've had this massive decline, and we were, what was causing this decline in marbled murrelets? And the best science tells us is that the decline was due to the primary forest predators. Those would be ravens and Steller's jays. And here's some numbers from the Christmas bird counts from the Santa Cruz Mountains. And this is birds per party hour. You can see the ravens were historically rare birds. They weren't birds that were seen very frequently until the early 80s. The numbers you can see here, this went basically exponential as far as the number that we see on a regular basis. Many of you probably remember this progression even in your lifetimes. And so in addition to ravens, which weren't very numerous, ravens again are a member of the corvid family. They are related to the Steller's jay. And the Steller's jay is a natural predator, a native predator for marbled murrelets. And marbled murrelets likely evolved under predation pressure from Steller's jays. Steller's jays are very intelligent animals, and marbled murrelets have evolved this very secretive behavior around their nests, most likely in response to being partners in this forest with Steller's jays. And here you can see the number of Steller's jays that we had associated with our campgrounds and heavily visited areas was, this one shows only about 7 times greater, but we had numbers up to 9 times greater the number of Steller's jays in our campgrounds as in our control areas, in the forest areas just outside the campgrounds. And in addition to these two things that help tell this story, we also had the beginnings of monitorings of these marbled murrelet nests. People started to find them and put video cameras on them. And what we have are a handful of accounts of marbled murrelets being predated, either the chicks or the eggs, by Steller's jays, red-shouldered hawks, red-tailed hawks, and especially by ravens. Here you can see a jay is coming in, and it is what we call flushing the adult. The adult's able to fly away, but of course that one egg that they're able to actually lay that year gets eaten by the Steller's jay. So this is nature. This is what's been happening for eons. But because we have supported so many corvids through our campgrounds, through the supplementation of food that we, park visitors, bring in, we were seeing this very marked decline in marbled murrelets. I have a handful of other videos. Just there's another jay that attacks and kills a murrelet. I'll show you that one. And so as a land manager, I have this seabird that spends most of its life out in the ocean. What can I do in terms of managing it? Well, this corvid connection is it. This is where we can make our mark. Now, what does that look like? What can I do to do something about decreasing the numbers of these animals? I am thinking about what they're eating. I'm thinking about their food source, right? And when I first began, this was the standard trash can that we had at Big Basin. And oftentimes you would arrive early morning in the park and the animals are working together. You have the raccoons that pull the lids off of the trash cans, or park visitors maybe don't put them back on. And then you have the squirrels and the birds and the raccoons can all now get access to the food or the trash that's in there, right? And this was a real ongoing struggle. So the oil spills funded a complete reworking of the trash system. We got animal-proof trash containers for all of the Santa Cruz Mountains parks, and we was also able to find additional funding to increase the number of trash cans, animal-proof trash cans, in many of our other parks in our district. Now, when you show up to go camping and you've brought all this food, generally, like people are, they're happy to be together, they want to share meals, you got to eat, and so they bring these big bins and the bags of food, and then they just get left out, right? No, oftentimes people weren't putting those things back in their cars. And so we funded almost $1.5 million of food storage lockers, where you have a nice big box essentially that is able to protect your food from the critters being able to get into it. Now, these are actually called bear boxes. Many of you have probably seen them in the Sierra Nevada, where you're likely to see bears. And that after doing a bunch of research, that was the right thing to do. Those are big enough that it can take one of those Costco-sized, two of them. You can put 2 Costco-sized coolers in there and a couple of bins. And they were like, people were like, well, people know what, well, they know what to do with them. Well, people know what to do with them. They get it. But we also did some messaging for this, right? Which I'll get to in a second. But I'll also mention that we did targeted raven removal. This was called for in the restoration plan as part of the many points of work that we were working on, right? We were looking at doing this garbage control, food control, and one piece of this was doing some level of raven removal. And I don't think that we removed more than about 40 ravens over the course of about 15 years. But it was a piece of this puzzle. And so I get to the interpretation in the media that we were working with at the time. Now, I'll share with you a couple of ideas. One is that I really liked, which was feed a jay, kill a murrelet. I still kind of like it because it really gets to the heart of it for me. That was developed up in Northern California. But we came up with handouts hurt and gave a little bit of information about the murrelet. It's kind of a cool story, this mysterious bird that is unique to hear. As a biologist, I want to tell the story. I think it's interesting. But it turns out that that's not really it. That's not how you change behavior. And so we, a small group of us from the trustee council and from the different parks that are managing murrelets in California, we came up with a new concept. And this is the idea of keep it crumb clean. Now you can imagine, how do you try and engage the public? How do you try and tell this story? And it's a really challenging story to tell because I want to try and find a way to get you to care about a bird you're probably never going to see or hear. Now, how do you tell that with a picture? How do you tell that with words? It was this challenging thing to work on. And I still don't know that I love this. Maybe there's a better way, but it's the best way that we were able to encapsulate this idea is to keep it crumb clean. The idea that even a crumb matters. Even a crumb can kill a bird. So one of the things that came out of this is the oil spill in Northern California funded a sociologist to do a study on how to try and tell this story. And she gave us, I think, 10 or 11 different points that we needed to follow in order to get people to do what we wanted. One is to capture their attention with a title. The very first thing that people see on a sign is the thing that needs to grab their attention. So here, that title is the keep it crumb clean. And ideally, that title tells you what kind of behavior you want to see from people. And even better, if you can show it in a picture. So the idea is that this picnic table is sparkling clean and the jays just flying on by. Now, I do recognize the irony that that bird could have maybe cleaned the table and moved on, but what are you going to do, right? Like it's a hard concept to try and share. So then again, we want to tell it with a picture. So we've showed kids cleaning up those picnic tables. That's what they're doing. We want to show them in action, doing the action we want to see. And then we give people very simple bullet points. Never leave food unattended. Use food lockers where available. Oh, I'm sorry, this is actually an old one. We updated it to say, never leave food or trash. Use food lockers where available. Never feed wildlife. And as a biologist, again, I need to tell why? Well, because your crumbs attract jays and ravens who eat the eggs and babies of endangered marbled murrelets. Many people care about endangered animals just because they're endangered. And then here we have these logos at the bottom. And those logos suggest that all of the people in those organizations care. Those people care about this message. They agree with it, they're behind it, and you should be too. And then down here at the bottom in fine print, in tiny, tiny type, because you don't want to leave with this, is a fear-based approach. Feeding wildlife is a violation of CCR, blah, 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 and it carries a fine. So the sociologist tells us that you need to have all of these elements because some people do things because everybody is telling them to do. Some people only read the title. Some people do it only because they're afraid of getting in trouble. And some people do it because they want to know why. We'll do it only if they know why. So that is the background. That's what we were dealing with as we were creating this sign. And I'm really quite proud of the sign in a way. It took a lot of work and energy to put together. But we weren't done yet. It turned out that there was consistently new need for messaging. And one thing about campers you learn is that not everybody has been camping before. Not everybody knows how to do their dishes or is prepared to do their dishes for when they're camping. And so I hired a graphic designer who does this really fun, cartoony art. And we came up with Camp Dishes 101 to give people an idea about what to do with that wastewater. We built grates that were designed to go over the water spigots so that if people did their dishes there, that food scraps, like little bits of spaghetti and tomato, they would fall down into an inaccessible space because those water spigots were actually feeding stations for jays, for raccoons, for squirrels. And I like to think about this. This is a picture from, many of you probably have seen this before. This is an image from Yosemite. And behind the ranger who's standing guard here is a bunch of bears feeding. This was the bear feeding time. So when the trash would get dumped off, people could come and watch the bears eat from the trash. And so this was, what we were living with 60 years ago at our neighboring park of Yosemite. And so I do believe that we've evolved quite a lot in terms of our thinking about wildlife and our relationship to it. And we've all been a little bit part of that in terms of this crumb clean message. I know some of you probably helped interpret this message when you were volunteering up at Big Basin. All right, so here I have the map of the Santa Cruz Mountains, and you can see these little dots, and the little dots represent locations where murrelets have been found during this particular year. I think this is 2015. The tiny ones represent adults, and the larger ones represent chicks. And we do 9 surveys a year looking for marbled murrelets off the coast of California, from Half Moon Bay all the way down to Santa Cruz. And this slide represents the numbers as they've changed over the years. So in the early 2000s, we had between 600-700 adults. And you can see in 2008, that number dipped down to less than 200. But you can see that it's quite variable between the different years. And here you can see the number of chicks. That's the juvenile ratio, the number of times we have seen the young of the year out on the water. And you can, again, make out that this number is very variable over time. But generally, I say at this point in time, we have about 400 marbled murrelets that are part of this genetically distinct population of murrelets that nests in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And things are changing with them. Even before the CZU fire, you can see the map on the left shows a concentration. That's where the red exists on the coast. That shows a concentration of birds off of Año Nuevo Point, largely focused on that breeding in the Butno and Big Basin area. You can see as time has gone on, there's a shift that has occurred, and we don't quite know why, but we can see that heat map of the highest density of birds is moving further north. We don't know why. All right, so I shared with you this idea of a marbled murrelet chick. The parents lay an egg, they incubate it for about 28 days, and then the chick hatches. It is on the nest with the parents for about 3 days. On that third day, it's old enough to be left alone, and the parents then go back full-time, both of them, to the ocean. And they bring the chick, as I mentioned, a fish or multiple fish up to 8 times a day. And at some point, about 28 days again later, they don't bring it a fish. There's no meal that day. And this is a signal to the chick that it's time. And it spends all day long plucking its feathers off. It's got this down, you saw that fluffy down. Well, underneath all that fluffy down are fully formed feathers. And all of that down rains down on the forest floor, and fully formed adult feathers are there. Now, I always imagine that this is an awkward moment for marbled murrelets. It's when it's time to fledge. This is a bird that has never flown before. Well, dusk comes, the sun sets, and it's getting dark. It's getting so dark you can almost not see anymore. And having never flown before, this bird jumps and it flies all the way to the ocean. And I just think that's such an incredible story that, I've seen so many young birds, and they are not graceful, and they're not coordinated, and they certainly don't fly very well. So I think it's so cool that it's able to make it all the way to the ocean. And how far did I say that they actually can fly? Up to 62 miles they make it. Here, it's only about 13 miles from the ocean. And sometimes they don't make it, right? Sometimes they're not that successful at making it. You can imagine why. As a young chick, having never flown before, they might end up on the ground. So occasionally we see marbled murrelet chicks on the ground. And that was what started this whole journey of why are there marbled murrelets on the forest floor? Because they were the chicks, they were the young of the year. And here you can see a chick that's been found on the forest floor. You can make out these little bits of down that are still attached to its head where it wasn't able to reach. You can even make out that egg tooth on the tip of its beak. So because they're endangered, because they're so rare, we want people to collect them and to bring them into us. And so we created this little flyer that is wanted marbled murrelet chicks. And if you find a chick on the ground, how do you handle it, and what do you do? And that's actually my personal cell phone number right there, so that people can reach me at any time. And I've had about 6 phone calls over the years. I've saved, as a result of folks calling in, I've saved a handful of them. Even one that was up in Northern California, one that was up in Prairie Creek Redwoods, I was able to help coordinate the collection and the taking out of the bird. So what happens at this point is that we transport it to the local CDFW office where they do a full physical on it. If it's healthy, if it's got enough fat, We go ahead and we wait till dusk, and then we take it all the way out to Bean Hollow usually. Bean Hollow is kind of a protected cove, and we're able to take it out into the water and let it go right at dusk. Now, the kind of my parting words, which I'm not very happy to give, but I do want to talk a little bit about the CZU fire of 2020. Many of you were locals, you were here and got to experience some of this. Well, I want you to notice a couple of things on this slide. So the blue is the favored nesting area of marbled murrelets, and the red is the footprint of the CZU. You know, in about 12 hours, the fire burned about 45,000 acres, including 97% of Big Basin. And as a result, it burned up more than 60% of the favored marbled murrelet nesting habitat of Big Basin. And have here another image that kind of shows you that progression over time. That center green color that you see was the burning that happened in that 12-hour period. You can see that the majority of the fire burned very quickly over much of their habitat. And at this point, we've been monitoring murrelets. We do forest surveys to look at numbers changing over time. We're continuing to do those at-sea surveys. We've been putting out audio recording units to monitor the calls, to see if we can determine if they're nesting in new areas. Where are they going? And what are their numbers like in those locations? And there's a lot of unanswered questions at this point. We don't have all of the answers. We know that a lot of their habitat is lost for now. You know, many of the murrelet trees, the redwoods and so on, they're still alive. They're still very much alive. However, some of the favored nesting habitat for marbled murrelets is Douglas firs. Douglas firs form the large, weird branches much more quickly than redwoods do. And most of those Douglas firs died in the fire. They just don't have the thick bark that's able to protect them in this event. So what does that mean? I anticipate that murrelets will be moving. They won't be moving to some of those areas of less favored habitat in the next several years. They will find new places to nest, and we're in the middle of looking for them.